The first man Doss saved didn't want to be saved. Sergeant Howell, half his guts hanging out, screaming at Doss to leave him, to take cover, calling him every name the Army taught us, and some his mama probably didn't. But Doss just kept wrapping intestines back inside belly, kept tying tourniquets with hands so steady they didn't belong on that ridge, bullets chewing up the coral 6 inches from his head. I'm watching this from a shell crater, thinking I've gone insane from the heat. This is Hacksaw Ridge, May 1945, the worst 100 acres in the Pacific, and this conscientious objector, who the whole company wanted to court-martial 6 months ago, is dragging Howell toward the cliff edge by his ankles, whispering prayers I can barely hear over the Type 92 tearing up everything around them. That's when I understood. We'd gotten everything backwards about courage. Let me back up because you need to understand where we were and what that ridge meant. Okinawa, spring of 1945, last island before Japan itself. The 77th and 96th Infantry Divisions got handed the job of taking the Maida Escarpment. We called it Hacksaw Ridge because that's what it looked like, a jagged 400-foot coral cliff rising straight up out of the Okinawan mud. The Japanese 62nd Division had been digging into that rock for weeks, turning every cave and tunnel into a firing position. It was a fortress, natural kill zone. And we had to take it because it anchored their whole defensive line across the island. Late April, the 96th Division tried first, got chewed to pieces. We moved up to replace them in the last days of the month, and you could tell what we were walking into just by looking at the men coming back. They had that hollow look, the one that says they've seen something they can't explain and don't want to remember. Fresh graves marked the trails, helmets and rifles scattered everywhere like someone had just dropped them and run. Maybe they had. The ridge itself, you could see it from our staging area, sheer coral face, honeycombed with cave mouths, scorched black from artillery, but still standing. At night, you'd hear Japanese voices echoing off the rock, sometimes singing, sometimes shouting. During the day, you'd just stare at it and wonder how anyone was supposed to climb that thing, let alone fight on top of it. That's where Doss comes in. Private First Class Desmond Doss, combat medic, 1st Battalion, 307th Infantry, 77th Division, skinny kid from Lynchburg, Virginia, Seventh-day Adventist, wouldn't touch a rifle, wouldn't even hold one during training. They tried everything to get him out. His captain tried to court-martial him for insubordination. His own platoon beat him up one night in the barracks, hoping he'd quit. His father, who'd fought in the First War, begged him to just carry the damn gun even if he didn't use it. Doss said no every time, said his faith wouldn't allow it, said he'd serve as a medic or not at all. Somehow, he made it through training and over to the Pacific, fought on Guam, fought on Leyte, proved himself brave under fire, but nobody really trusted him. By the time we got to Okinawa, most of us just avoided him. Some guys thought he was crazy. Some thought he was bad luck. I thought he was probably going to get himself killed being stupid. We spent those first days of May dug in at the base of Hacksaw, listening to that ridge at night, trying not to think about what was coming. Okinawan heat, humid and thick, mosquitoes everywhere, red mud that turned everything to soup when it rained. The smell, always the smell, bodies rotting in the sun that nobody could reach, cordite, diesel from the tanks, human waste. You get used to it, but it never stops being there. Doss kept to himself mostly, read his pocket Bible, wrote letters to his wife Dorothy, checked his aid kit over and over. He carried extra bandages, extra morphine, no weapon, not even a knife. Some guys would share a foxhole with him, some wouldn't. One night, I saw him share his rations with a kid named Jenkins who'd lost his pack crossing a stream. Doss didn't eat meat, so he just handed over his canned ham like it was nothing. Another night, I heard him praying out loud while mortars walked across the hill above us, just talking to God like they were old friends. It made some guys uncomfortable, made others feel a little safer, though they wouldn't admit it. May 4th, the orders came down. 1st Battalion would assault the ridge at dawn. Captain Vernon didn't sugarcoat it, told us to buddy up, make sure someone knew how to contact our families. Some men wrote last letters that night. Some cleaned their rifles in silence. Some just stared. Doss prayed for hours, kneeling in the mud, lips moving constantly. We moved out at 0400, ate cold rations standing up, did our weapons checks. I remember men quietly vomiting from nerves. The column formed in darkness and headed toward the cliff base. You could hear the ridge before you could see it. Our artillery pounding the plateau, shells screaming overhead, explosions echoing off that coral like thunder trapped in a box. Then at 0530, the barrage lifted and everything went quiet. Time to climb. The engineers had anchored cargo nets and rope ladders at the top of the cliff. We loaded onto them in the darkness, dozens of men climbing at once, rifles and gear banging against the rock. My hands slipped on wet rope. My legs burned. The cliff stretched up forever, and the whole time I kept thinking, where are the Japanese? Why aren't they shooting? This is too easy. Some guys whispered the same thing. Others knew better and saved their breath for climbing. Halfway up, someone above me lost his grip and fell. I heard him scream all the way down, heard the sound when he hit. The whole column stopped moving. Captain Vernon shouted to keep climbing. We climbed. At the top, we tumbled over the lip onto the plateau and spread out like we'd trained, looking for cover, establishing a perimeter. The plateau was moonscape, shattered trees, coral outcroppings, shell craters everywhere, and silence. Too much silence. We'd made it. 47 men from our platoon on top of Hacksaw Ridge. For about 20 minutes, we thought maybe the artillery had done its job. Maybe the Japanese had pulled back. Maybe we'd gotten lucky. Then it started, 800 hours. The Japanese had waited, let us think we'd won, let us get comfortable. Then they opened up from positions the artillery never touched. Machine gun fire from caves we couldn't see. Mortar rounds dropping with perfect accuracy like someone was spotting us from above. Grenades lobbed from spider holes, cut into the coral, everything at once. Chaos. Men dropped all around me. I hit the dirt behind a coral outcropping, pressing myself flat while rounds snapped overhead. The coral was sharp, cutting through my uniform. I could see wounded men scattered in the open. Jenkins with his leg blown off below the knee, Grayson holding his neck, blood pulsing between his fingers, Carlson just screaming for his mother over and over. Officers were yelling to fall back, get off the ridge, but there was no organized retreat, just men crawling, running, dragging each other toward the cliff edge where the ropes hung. Some made it down. Some got shot off the ropes midway, bodies spinning 400 feet to the rocks below. The Japanese had tunnels that opened right onto the cliff face. They were shooting down on us from above while we tried to escape. Most of the company pulled back or died trying. Command later figured about 75 men got left on that plateau, wounded, pinned down, couldn't move. Standard doctrine for combat medics. Pull back with your unit. Don't become a casualty yourself. But Doss stayed. I saw him kneeling behind that outcropping, bullets chewing up the coral above his head, just looking at all those wounded men scattered across 50 yards of open ground. Then he whispered something. I found out later it was a prayer. Lord, help me get one more. And he moved, one man at a time. He'd low crawl to a wounded soldier, stabilize him as best he could right there under fire. Tourniquet, pressure bandage, morphine if they needed it, then drag him back toward the cliff edge. Some guys were conscious, helping by pushing with their good leg. Some were delirious, fighting him. Some were too heavy to drag, so he'd haul them by their web gear, inches at a time, while machine gun rounds kicked up coral dust all around. I watched him get to Grayson first. Neck wound, choking on his own blood. Doss packed the wound with gauze and held pressure for 2 whole minutes while a sniper took shots at them, missing by inches. Then he dragged Grayson to the cliff edge, tied a litter strap around him, and lowered him down hand over hand, 400 feet. His hands bled from the rope burn, but he didn't stop. Lieutenant Phillips went next, both legs shattered by a mortar. Doss splintered them with broken rifle stocks and pieces of tent pole, then dragged him across 30 yards of open ground during another mortar barrage. A round landed 6 feet away. The concussion blew them both sideways. Doss's ears bled, but he kept going. This went on for hours. Morning became afternoon. Doss worked without stopping. His aid bag emptied, so he scavenged supplies from the dead. His uniform was soaked with blood, none of it his own. Men who'd called him coward 6 months ago were weeping when they saw him coming for them. At one point, a Japanese grenade landed right at his feet. He kicked it away a split second before it went off. Shrapnel tore up his left leg, but he didn't even bandage himself, just kept working. I found out later he didn't treat his own wounds until hours after, when there was nobody left to save. There's one story I heard later that still bothers me. Doss found a Japanese soldier in a shell crater, gut shot, dying. The man reached for a grenade. Doss could have run, could have left him, but instead he talked to him softly, hands raised, then bandaged him anyway, lowered him down the cliff with the rest. I don't know if that's true, but enough guys swear they saw it that I believe it happened. That was Doss. He'd made his decision about killing and nothing, not fear, not hate, not self-preservation. Nothing moved him off it. By nightfall, American forces retook the plateau in a second assault, better coordinated, more men. When they swept the ridge, they found it scattered with wounded Americans who shouldn't have been alive. Officers tried to count how many Doss had saved. The numbers didn't make sense at first. Doss said 50. The men said more. They settled on 75. 75 men lowered down a 400-foot cliff on improvised rope rigs under continuous fire by one man who refused to carry a weapon. Another battalion's medic looked at Doss's hands, raw hamburger, bleeding, fingers swollen to twice their normal size, and asked him how he'd done it. Doss just shook his head. I kept praying for one more, he said, and then there was one more. The battalion secured Hacksaw Ridge by May 6th, but the fighting on Okinawa went on until June. Doss got wounded again on May 21st, took a sniper round through the arm while he was treating another soldier. They evacuated him after that. He spent months in military hospitals, had 17 surgeries over the next 5 years for his wounds and tuberculosis he caught on Okinawa, lost a lung and 5 ribs. The wounds never fully healed. But the story spread. First through the 77th Division, then up the chain of command. General MacArthur's staff investigated because it sounded impossible. But survivor testimony was consistent. They interviewed chaplains, officers, the men who'd been saved. By October 1945, President Truman gave Doss the Medal of Honor at the White House. First conscientious objector ever to receive it. Of those 75 men, many made it home. Grayson went back to Ohio, became a teacher, visited Doss every few years until Doss died in 2006. Lieutenant Phillips lost both legs, but lived to be 83. Always said Doss gave him those extra decades. Others weren't as lucky. Some died later in the campaign. Some carried wounds that killed them slowly over the years. But they had time they wouldn't have had otherwise. The men who'd beaten Doss during training, who'd called him coward, who'd wanted him gone. A lot of them wrote him letters after the war. Apologies, gratitude, confusion. One letter from Sergeant Howard said, "I don't understand what you did or why God let you do it, but I'm alive because you did. My daughter's alive because you did. I'm sorry for what I called you." Doss kept those letters in a shoebox, never talked about them much. Hacksaw Ridge broke the Shuri line. American forces pushed south after that, collapsed Japanese resistance on Okinawa, though at terrible cost. Over 12,000 American dead, 50,000 casualties total. Japanese military deaths somewhere between 70 and 100,000. Okinawan civilians, more than 100,000 dead, caught between two armies with nowhere to go. The battle convinced Allied command that invading mainland Japan would cost 1 million casualties or more. That math led to the decision to drop the atomic bombs in August. The war ended without invasion. Doss never spoke about that connection publicly, but he knew it. Every man who fought on Okinawa knew it. Doss went home to Virginia after the war, to Dorothy, tried to build something normal, worked as a carpenter until his injuries made that impossible, raised a son, went to church every Saturday like he always had. He didn't talk much about Hacksaw Ridge unless someone asked directly, and even then he kept it simple. "I was just doing my job," he'd say. But the men who served with him, the ones who lived, they talked, at reunions, in VFW halls, to their kids and grandkids. They said Doss had been touched by something that night. Not luck, not training, something else. And they said his hands shook for the rest of his life. A tremor he couldn't control. Legacy of 12 hours dragging men across coral and lowering them down a cliff by rope. His hands shook, but they'd held when it mattered. I saw Doss one more time after the war, 1953, some veterans event in Virginia. He was thinner, walking with a cane, that tremor visible in both hands. We shook. I was one of the 75, and I didn't know what to say. "Thank you," felt too small. "You saved my life," felt too obvious. So I just asked him how he was doing. He smiled that same soft smile I remembered from the foxholes and said, "Getting by. Dorothy helps." Then he asked about my family, my work, my life, like we were old friends catching up over coffee, not like I owed him my entire existence. That was Doss. He never carried what he'd done like it was a weight or a burden. He just carried it. I think about him sometimes when people talk about courage, about what it means to stand alone when everyone else is sitting, or to sit when everyone else is running. Doss didn't care what we thought of him. He'd made peace with his God and his conscience long before he got to Okinawa, and nothing we said, Not the mockery, not the beatings, not the threats of discharge. None of it touched that. He knew who he was. And when the worst moment came, when the ridge was on fire and men were dying everywhere, and it would have been so easy to run or freeze or hide, he didn't. He moved. I don't know if that was faith or stubbornness or some strange combination of both. I stopped trying to figure it out decades ago. All I know is this: 75 men came down off Hacksaw Ridge who shouldn't have. I was one of them. My daughter exists because of Desmond Doss. My grandson exists because of him. And Desmond Doss never fired a shot his entire time in the Army. They called him a coward once. Every man who fought beside him carried that shame to their graves, not because he proved us wrong exactly, but because he never needed to. He'd already decided who he was going to be. And when everything turned to chaos and blood and terror, his decision held. That's all courage ever is, I think. A decision that holds when everything else breaks. And Doss's held.